The Young and the Restless Spoilers. The sleepless nights had turned Sharon into a shadow of herself, her eyes hollow from exhaustion and fear, yet she refused to leave Noah's side. Every mechanical beep from the monitor sounded like a countdown, every flicker of his pulse a fragile lifeline she clung to. But beneath her maternal devotion, there was an unease she couldn't shake, a feeling that danger was still circling, watching, waiting. Mitch Bacall might have been in police custody, but the sense of threat hadn't lifted. It lingered like a stain in the air, whispering to her that something about this entire ordeal wasn't finished. When dawn finally broke after another sleepless night, Sharon made a decision. She needed answers, not from doctors, not from detectives, but from Noah himself, from the life he'd built in Los Angeles before it all came crashing down. He had been living here for months, away from Genoa City, claiming to be working on a project and rebuilding his independence, but now Sharon realized how little she truly knew about what had been happening in his world. Allie Gwynn, Noah's former girlfriend, was the one person who might hold the key. They had broken up months earlier, quietly and without scandal, but Sharon remembered the warmth in Allie's voice and the way she had once understood Noah better than anyone else. When Sharon called, her tone was cautious but sincere. Allie hesitated before speaking, her voice heavy with guilt. She hadn't been in touch with Noah, but she still had the address of his house, a modest place in the hills, secluded but elegant, the kind of home that felt temporary, as if its owner never truly meant to stay. After jotting down the address, Sharon immediately called Nick, insisting they go together. They drove through the winding streets of Los Angeles in silence, the weight of dread growing with each mile. When they finally arrived, Noah's house stood quiet under the morning light. It was small but beautiful. White walls, glass doors, and a stillness that made the world outside feel distant. Sharon's heart tightened as she turned the key Allie had arranged to be sent digitally. Inside, the air was unnaturally clean, the furniture perfectly arranged, no trace of chaos or struggle. It was a life frozen in time. There were half-filled notebooks stacked neatly on the desk, a few art pieces leaning against the wall, and a camera lying untouched near the window, its lens capped. Everything was neat, too neat, as if someone had deliberately erased every sign of Noah's recent days. Nick walked deeper into the living room, scanning the space with wary eyes. He found mail stacked in order by date, unopened, and a laptop placed carefully beside a pile of sketches. It looked like Noah had planned to return soon. Sharon, however, noticed something different, a small, leather-bound notebook placed on the table beside a folded envelope. The leather was worn, the edges frayed, but her intuition told her this was important. When she opened it, she saw Noah's handwriting, uneven, emotional, desperate. The first few pages described simple things, reflections, frustrations, confessions about work and heartbreak, but as she turned the pages, the tone shifted. The entries became darker, filled with paranoia and dread. Noah wrote of being followed, of cars idling near his home at night, of phone calls that ended the moment he answered. He wrote about a man who had approached him weeks before the fall, a man who said he worked for someone who wanted to make a deal. There were notes about surveillance, a warning about unfinished business with the Bacalls, and a name scrawled in haste that chilled Sharon to the bone, Mitch. The last entry ended abruptly, the ink smeared as if written in a rush. "If anything happens to me, it wasn't an accident." Those words were underlined twice. Sharon felt her breath hitch, her vision blur as tears welled. Nick took the notebook from her trembling hands and flipped through it himself. His expression hardened, every line in his face etched with disbelief. Then they saw the envelope. It was addressed to Mom and Dad in Noah's handwriting, sealed but dated just days before his accident. Sharon's fingers shook as she opened it. Inside was a letter, and behind it, a legal document stamped and notarized. A will. Noah had written a will. The words inside were simple but devastating. "If I don't make it, please tell Faith and Summer that I love them. Don't blame yourself for what's coming. Some things can't be stopped. Take care of each other." He had left his modest estate to charity and requested no funeral, only peace. By the time Sharon finished reading, her sobs had broken the silence that filled the house. Nick wrapped an arm around her, but even his strength couldn't stop the ache that spread through the room. It wasn't just grief they felt, it was fear. Because the existence of this will meant Noah had known he was in danger long before the attack. Nick slammed the notebook shut, his jaw tight. He knew, he muttered under his breath, pacing across the room. Sharon's tears flowed silently as she clutched the letter to her chest. The journal wasn't just a record, it was evidence, a map of fear and warning signs no one had seen. She turned to the last page again, where Noah's handwriting trailed off mid-sentence. If Mitch finds me again, I'll have no choice but to. The rest was unreadable, the ink smeared beyond recognition. That unfinished line haunted her. It meant there was more to this story, more than an attempted murder, more than a random attack. It was a web of secrets Noah had been trying to unravel, one that stretched back to people and motives far beyond his understanding. Nick picked up Noah's phone from the nightstand, its battery long dead, and decided to take it with them. They would hand both the phone and the journal to Victor. But deep down, Sharon knew this wasn't just another business rival or an old grudge. Mitch had said he would destroy the entire Newman family, and now she realized he hadn't been exaggerating. This was organized, deliberate, and connected to something much older. The toxin, the surveillance, the letter, everything pointed to a conspiracy rooted in revenge. As they left Noah's house, Sharon turned back for one last look. The sunlight hit the windows just right, casting reflections across the spotless floor. For a moment, she imagined Noah there, smiling, carefree, alive. But the silence answered her instead. Somewhere, far away, the man who had nearly ended her son's life was still out there, plotting his next move. And the only clue that might stop him was now in her hands, a journal that held the final thoughts of a man who had seen death coming and tried, in vain, to leave behind a truth no one was ready to face. When they returned to the hospital, Victor was waiting. The sight of the notebook and the will wiped the color from his face. He understood immediately what it meant. This wasn't just a crime, it was a declaration of war. And the war had already started. That night, the truth hit Sharon and Nick like a tidal wave, drowning them in disbelief, horror, and heartbreak. The discovery of Noah's will was more than a tragic sign of foresight, it was proof that he had known his death was coming. The letter's tone was calm yet hauntingly resigned, written by a man who had accepted an outcome no one should ever have to imagine. Why would Noah Newman, young, full of ambition, and with his life ahead of him, write a will unless he was certain he was being hunted? The answer was as terrifying as it was obvious. He knew someone wanted him dead. Every line in that journal, every coded sentence, and every trembling stroke of his pen whispered the same truth. Noah had felt the shadow of death closing in long before anyone realized the danger. He had seen the faces watching him from afar, the cars following him late at night, the anonymous messages that warned him to stop asking questions. He had tried to be brave, tried to handle it alone to protect his family, but the moment he put his fears to paper, he had already accepted what was inevitable. Sharon could barely breathe as she clutched the journal in her hands, her tears soaking the ink-stained pages. She read over the entries again, each word heavier than the last. Noah's writing revealed a man unraveling under invisible pressure, someone who wanted to confide in his family but couldn't, someone who was determined to uncover the truth yet knew the cost it might demand. When she reached the section that mentioned Sienna's name for the first time, her heart stopped. The words were scrawled hastily, almost panicked. I think she knows. Sienna isn't who she says she is. If anything happens, tell Dad to look at her. Sharon's eyes widened, her body trembling as the reality of the situation began to take shape. Sienna, the woman everyone had dismissed as a manipulator, but never as a murderer, had orchestrated everything. When Nick read the same passage, something inside him snapped. The image of Noah lying helpless in that hospital bed collided with the knowledge that Sienna Bacall, the wife of Mitch, the woman who had smiled her way into the elite circles of Genoa City and Los Angeles, had been behind it all. His pulse thundered in his ears, his hands balled into fists, and his vision blurred with rage. He wanted blood. "She's the reason my son almost died," he hissed, pacing like a caged predator. "She's been pulling the strings all along, Mitch was just her weapon." He could feel the rage boiling to a point where reason no longer existed. He wanted to confront her, to end her schemes with his own hands. The thought of Sienna walking free, continuing her charade, made his stomach turn. But before he could act on impulse, Sharon grabbed his arm, her voice cracking under the weight of both terror and love. She reminded him that vengeance would destroy what was left of them. Noah's pain couldn't be avenged through blood, it had to be through truth. "We can't let her win," she told him through tears. "If you go after her, she'll already have taken another piece of this family. We'll bring everything to the police. Let justice, not rage, decide her fate." Nick froze, the fury in his chest colliding with the logic in her voice. He wanted to argue, to scream, but deep down he knew she was right. They couldn't become monsters to fight one. Within an hour, they were at the police station, their eyes swollen from crying, their hands clutching the folder that contained Noah's will, the journal, and the digital copies of messages from his phone. The detectives who met them could see the anguish on their faces. When Sharon placed the evidence on the table, her voice trembled as she explained what they had found, how Noah's writings revealed his fear, his awareness of being targeted, and the name of his would-be killers. Every word she spoke seemed to thicken the air. The detectives flipped through the pages, their expressions growing more serious with each line. There was enough there to reopen the case from attempted murder to premeditated conspiracy. The arrest warrant for Sienna Bacall was issued by nightfall. Officers surrounded her luxury penthouse, cutting off every escape. The once glamorous woman who had charmed half of Los Angeles now stood silent as they handcuffed her, her face pale but defiant. The world saw a socialite, the Newmans now saw a puppet master unmasked. But what chilled everyone was the calm smile that never left her lips. She said nothing as they read her rights, only glancing toward the flashing cameras with an almost serene indifference, as if she had been expecting this. Back at the hospital, Nick's emotions shifted between fury and despair. He paced outside Noah's room, replaying the image of Sienna's smug expression over and over in his mind. "She knew," he whispered, barely holding back tears. "She planned everything, even Mitch's capture." The thought of it made him sick. But Sharon, ever the voice of fragile steadiness, reminded him of the greater battle ahead. Justice wasn't about one arrest, it was about proving who had truly ordered the attack, because deep down, she sensed Sienna wasn't working alone. There were names in that journal, cryptic initials, coded references to investors and silent partners, suggesting a network larger than anyone had realized. Sharon knew what she had to do next. As soon as dawn broke, she drove to Victor's estate, the journal and will pressed tightly in her hands. When Victor opened the door, his stern face softened slightly at the sight of her. She handed him the evidence, her voice trembling as she said, "You need to see this." Victor sat down in silence and began reading Noah's words, his eyes narrowing with every paragraph. The entries about Mitch were one thing, but when he reached Sienna's name, his entire posture changed. He looked up, the fire in his eyes reigniting, not the fury of a man betrayed, but the controlled wrath of a patriarch who had seen too many enemies underestimate his family. "This isn't over," he muttered, closing the journal. "She's not smart enough to have done this alone." He stood, his mind already calculating, connecting the threads between Sienna, Mitch, and the unnamed figures Noah had written about. Sharon could see the storm brewing in him. She knew that once Victor took over, this wouldn't just be an investigation, it would be a reckoning. He promised Sharon that every name in that book would be found, every ally exposed, and every hidden hand brought to light. But as she left the mansion, clutching the empty envelope Noah had addressed to her, Sharon couldn't shake the ache in her chest. Her son had foreseen his own tragedy, and though justice was finally moving, she feared it had come too late. She looked at the sunrise and whispered a silent promise, that no matter how deep the conspiracy went, she would see it through. For Noah. For the truth. And somewhere far away, behind prison walls, Sienna Bacall smiled in the dark, because justice, in her world, had always been another game to manipulate. The war for truth had only just begun.